Okay, good evening and welcome to another episode of Offstage Live with the Jazz Arts Group of Columbus, bringing you Offstage Lives every Thursday and Sunday right here on Facebook Live. My name is Zach Compton. I'm the Director of Education and Community Engagement for the Jazz Arts Group. I am so thrilled to be here with another episode. The weather is getting beautiful, slowly but surely, and we're so glad to be bringing you some more music and inspiration from our Columbus jazz and music scene. Tonight, we get to honor our founder and one of my closest mentors, Mr. Ray Eubanks. And in his honor, we ask that you might consider making a small donation to our organization. Jazz Arts Group was founded in 1973, and a small gift of $19.73 would go a long way for us towards continuing to keep jazz alive, keep our performances and our education and all of the great work that the Jazz Arts Group is doing. To do so, you can go to jazzemergencyfund.com. You can make any amount of any contribution you can. We are so appreciative of that. Anything you can do to support the arts during this time. All of the organizations right now are doing everything we can to survive during these times so that we can thrive in the future. In addition to supporting us financially, please be sharing the good news of Jazz Arts Group on social media. You can like our Facebook pages at The Jazz Academy and at Jazz Arts Group. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Jazz Arts Group. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and you can choose our organization if you are on Amazon Smile making those purchases. Small amounts will get to go to our organization as well. So I'm really excited to have this very special guest with us today. I first met Ray Eubanks when I was a student at Capital University, and I couldn't have imagined back in the early 2000s that in the future I would be interviewing him as a representative of the organization that he started. But before we bring him on, we're going to show you a small clip from a recent DVD entitled Jazz Arts Group of Columbus, Vision, Community, and Big Band Jazz. These 2 minutes of music that you're about to hear in the intro to this wonderful documentary will tell you everything you need to know about the legacy that Mr. Ray Eubanks started.
Around 73, we had a gig. I still remember it. It was at the Eastland Shopping Center, which was a very new shopping center at that point. And they were having a holiday concert. It was in the afternoon. We played for about 3 hours in the middle of the mall. And it was, I could tell that day that there was something special about this group of people. And it turned out that it blossomed over the years into a pretty fine performance organization.
We were ticket holders for about 25 years. And I think what drew us to JAG was the music itself, the big band music, the jazz aspect, and everything.
I'm from Massillon, Ohio, so, middle of the road town. There's some decent musicians, but when I came down here, it's, big city time. We're talking about a level of musicianship altogether on the stage that I'd only seen little bits of. So the sound of the band just knocks you out.
The big band always, to me, brought a lot of energy. I think about it almost every time I sing with the big band. It's almost like riding a roller coaster. It's like they're a beast. It's like you're in front of this powerhouse.
And of course, the man himself, Ray Eubanks, welcome to our Offstage Live. And first and foremost, on behalf of everyone at Jazz Arts Group and the entire Columbus community, thank you for everything that you've done. I don't know if you realize the impact you've made, and we're going to get into that here, but thank you and welcome for being here. Welcome to our Offstage Live.
Thanks for asking me, Zach. Pleasure to be here and to say hello to whoever's listening.
Well, I can tell you for the weeks that we've been doing this, the CJO audience is joining us and everyone here in Columbus. And so many people know your legacy, even on Facebook, and it's continuing on very much today. Just starting out today, Rosemary Cox says hello. Pete Mills says hello from Facebook already. So you've got quite a captive audience already.
I'm glad somebody's watching.
And of course, your daughter Kristen is watching as well. Hey, Kristen. I'm sure that you and your wife miss the grandkids right now. I imagine during pandemic time.
Yeah, we really do.
Yeah. So I wanted to first mention that DVD, Vision, Community, and Big Band Jazz, that was a project that was put together by Robin Gulcher. Talk just for just a second, because this has been screened on WSU. I would love to see Jazz Arts Group do a screening maybe like this virtually in the future. Talk just for a second about the DVD and about Robin.
Robin was with me from almost the very beginnings. I mean, people have forgotten that we did concerts in the Ohio Theater. There was a point where we did our first concerts in Mays Hall at Capital University, and then the Ohio Theater opened, and they needed anybody to play in there, so they gave us a theater for free. So we played some concerts. We played maybe 4 or 5 concerts down there. It wasn't a season. And then there was the 1977 season. We were homeless. we were playing in high school auditoriums all over town.
Okay.
And the last concert of that season was at Patel Auditorium, and I got to talking to the woman that ran the hall, and she said, "Well, why don't you just move up here? We're not that busy." And we did. That was in 1978.
Wow. And so Robin was such a huge part, and for him to create that DVD, one of the things that I noticed is that it's such a natural story. He did such a good job of capturing the story as it was there to be told. Not a lot of extra sort of side drama or other narratives other than the main story about the band and the CJO or JAG, as it were. I was really impressed with the way that Robin captured the story, for sure.
Well, Robin and I have known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
And he probably knows me better than I know me.
Yeah.
So when he proposed this to me, I mean, this was all him.
Yeah.
I mean, I had some say in it, but it's largely Robin's work of art.
Yeah, and that it is, for sure. Ray, I want to go back and just spend a quick moment talking about the beginnings. You were coming of age as a musician from Cambridge, Ohio. You came to Ohio State University in the mid '60s, and
Actually 59.
59.
Yeah, 59 was my freshman year. Yeah.
Well, I was just trying to make you younger, Ray. Don't be mad.
Well, sorry.
So you came of age in Cambridge, Ohio, and came to Ohio State. You were at Ohio State and around the Columbus music scene during what I don't think people realize the bubblings of jazz that were happening at the time.
Oh my.
And we think about folks like Jim Rupp, certainly like John Fedchock, Byron Rooker, Wes Orr, yourself. Even Becky Ogden was a part of those OSU ensembles. Grandma Becky, who we know and love as the jazz lady today. Talk just for a second about before you got your job at Capitol and created the CJO, what was going on at Ohio State and with the jazz ensembles at that time?
Well, there was a band at Ohio State called the Jazz Forum, but it wasn't allowed in the School of Music. So it rehearsed in the student union. Sonny McBroom led that band, who later was one of my tenor players.
Yeah.
I did not plan that band because it folded, I think, my sophomore year in school.
Okay.
So I didn't plan that band, but I started playing professionally in Columbus. I think probably the winter quarter of my freshman year, because there was a lot of live music in Columbus. And all the fraternities had parties, and the band that I eventually formed included some guys that became pretty big names. I mean, Bob Porco became the associate director of the Cleveland Orchestra and the director of opera at the University of Indiana. And Dick Stoltzman was one of the world's greatest clarinet players for many, 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 many years. Sid Townsend was a big educator here in Western, as a matter of fact. and I always look at people and say I was the failure.
Wow,
never
that's
left
saying
town.
something.
And Ladd came on. Ladd was a student. I barely knew Ladd until.
And so tell everybody who Ladd McIntosh was first.
Well, he comes from Canal Fulton, which is up close to Canton, and he tells this story because I've forgotten it. I tried to form a band my freshman year, which was a huge failure, a huge failure, and I asked Ladd to play. It didn't work. Ladd left school after freshman year. He left school for a year or two, and then came back and formed a band.
Yeah.
We called it a pocket big band, and I think we went to the Villanova Jazz Festival in '60. It might have been '63, my senior year in college. We went to Villanova, and Ladd received an award for best composer. The Duquesne Band won the thing, but Michigan State was there with their band, which included the Barone brothers, who became very famous musicians.
Right.
And North Texas State was there, but the Duquesne Band won because they had Butch Miles on drums.
Okay. Yeah, the eventual Count Basie drummer, Butch Miles. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Who has been featured with the Columbus Jazz Orchestra several times.
Yes, that's right.
Everything comes full circle like that. Talk just for a second.
Was our very first guest artist in 1973.
And talk for just a second about the fact that I believe it was you, Byron Rooker, still with the band, and Wes Orr, of course, the lead trumpeter for all those years, were in that band of lads at Ohio State. Is that right?
Rooker was not in that first band. No.
Okay.
That was the 66 or 67 Ohio State band. Okay. Ladd was still in school, working on his master's degree.
Yeah.
And he got his bachelor's, was working on his master's, and then started this big band. I mean, 5 trumpets, 4 trombones, 5 saxophones. That was later.
Right.
And I was not a part of that.
Okay.
I was just rooting on the sidelines. But Ladd and I then started a pop band.
Yeah.
Called The Live New Breed, which was very popular in Columbus for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then I left town.
Yep. And so that band was that band ever, any of those ensembles that Ladd led at OSU, were they ever recognized by the university as official university ensembles?
Yes, they were.
Okay.
Yeah. They when Ladd reformed the band in '63, it was under the auspices of Phi Mu Alpha Symphonia.
Yeah.
And that band rehearsed in the music school.
Okay. And so I want to fast forward because it wasn't very many years later that you're back in Columbus. You take appointment at Capital University teaching, yes. and really what became the beginnings of what Jazz Arts Group could be started there. But it happened in conjunction with you starting a jazz program at Capital University. That was your doing. So talk about the starting of jazz at Capital and how that led to being able to start Jazz Arts Group.
Well, the jazz program started, and the jazz program started, and the big band and the Jazz Arts Group started just about the same time.
Right.
And there were actually 2 bands. There was the all-professional band that played Music Performance Trust Fund gigs, and then there was the band that played the Clark Terry concert, which part of the grant money that Capital University received said that students would be performing beside professionals.
Right.
And I don't know whether you had that picture or not, but
I don't have that one on my computer. I wish I did. I was looking for it.
Yeah, that's a concert that Clark Terry came in and played.
Yes.
But there were about 5 students in that band, and most of those students went on to have careers in music.
And part of that was possible because you had a president of the university at the time that had the foresight to see the sort of undertones of what you were doing at Capitol and go, what's this guy doing with jazz, and actually support it with funding.
That's kind of a funny story, because the faculty back then, the full faculty met, and that was a time when the faculty lived close. Most of the faculty lived in Bexley and were close to the university.
Mm-hmm.
So a faculty meeting, there were usually a couple hundred people at a faculty meeting, and the faculty had to vote on this.
Wow.
And a guy who I'm not going to mention his name, but a guy who later became a very good friend of mine, when he found out I was interested in athletics, actually stood up in the faculty meeting and said, "This is the devil's music."
I wanted you to say that because I think the audience, I think it might be hard for some of our audience to realize that at that time, you're looking at late 60s, early 70s, obviously, jazz had been around and jazz was blending with rock music. And there was a real stereotype that music was, in fact, devil's music, or at a minimum, degenerate type music.
Yeah.
And to think about that now is crazy.
Well, it shows you how much evolution has taken place.
Right.
And Tom Langevin was a very insightful visionary.
Yeah, the president.
And he actually heard the band. We were just playing for the fun of it when we first started. We were primarily, it was a lot of the members of the Jerry Kay Orchestra, which was the big professional show band in town. Played all the Broadway shows, et cetera, in the fair and all those things. Had a little bit different personnel, but wasn't exactly the same.
Yeah.
But so that's, and starting the jazz arts group came about as a result of a conversation actually at the fair.
Right. I was hoping you would say this. Yeah.
Between Wes Orr, who was the 40-year lead trumpeter.
Yes. Right. We love him. Yeah.
And Ola Hansen, who has passed, and Al Berry, who we saw earlier in the video. Yep. And I remember those guys were standing. I was sitting on a fence railing in back of the stage, and I said, "Well, I've got the book and the place," and that's how it all started.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so the band started really as a rehearsal band, as I understand it. Is that right?
Correct.
And so
was taking a Sunday walk one day and walked into the rehearsal because the doors were open.
Right.
In the spring. And he walked in and sat down and sat there for the entire time we played. And we got to talking about it, and he kind of went, And then later a guy by the name of Bob Chapman said, "You ever think about this?" And Bob Chapman was the development director.
Right.
And was responsible for us getting the first big grant we ever got from the National Endowment of the Arts.
Right.
And because we got a grant with the National Endowment of the Arts, I've been after the Ohio Arts Council and GCAC, GCAC wasn't nearly what it is today.
Yeah.
But the Ohio Arts Council was a pretty big deal. And when we got the grant from the National Endowment of the Arts, well, the local arts groups, the local arts councils and the state arts council didn't have a hell of a lot of choice. So then we started to be funded by them.
Yeah. And so
I wish I could remember Sally's last name. She was the president and the CEO of the Columbus Arts Council at the time, became a very good friend. And of course, Wayne Lawson, who is a legend in arts council history of nationally speaking.
Yeah.
He was the other guy who was extremely good to us.
And when you think about there being a jazz ensemble during the era that there was a feeling that jazz was not music to be funded publicly, certainly, or to be put in academia. I want the audience to realize that this project, and you sort of talked about it on the DVD as sort of an accident, this model of public funding and grants, but it was the first of its kind in the entire country.
It was the first not-for-profit jazz orchestra. I had thought there was a new one led by the bassist Charlie Hayden, I believe, called the New York Jazz Repertoire Orchestra, and I thought it was the first one, but he actually corrected me and say, no, he said, no, I copied you. And which I had my history turned around.
Right.
Because I'd always been talking about the National Jazz Repertory Company in New York City.
Right.
He said, no, you're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was appropriate that as you're formulating public concerts with this band, you're deciding to make it a public thing at the advice of the folks at Capitol and others, that the first main guest artist would be none other than Ladd McIntosh, who was
That's right.
such an important part of the jazz happenings over by way of Ohio State. Talk about that first show.
We had also become very good friends because we were in this commercial band together.
Yeah.
That he led, and Wes Orr was the lead trumpet player, and Barney Rucker was in that band. Some of the guys later became members of the jazz art groups when it formalized. But Ladd came. I don't know whether you have a picture of Ladd or not.
I don't.
He was a wild man back at that point in time.
Yeah.
He had hair almost down to his waist. and his music was pretty wild too, but he had an audience following in Columbus.
Right.
That came to concerts.
Yeah. You know what? I think I do. I have one of the first clippings from a concert program.
Yeah.
Here. So there's Ladd McIntosh.
Yeah.
Right
yeah.
there.
That's great. Yes.
Yeah. And so tell me about that first concert, because you had not decided really to charge or make it a ticketed event, but what was the reception for that first show like?
Well, as I remember it, there were about 600 people showed up in Mays Hall. We had a good crowd. Because Ladd had a big following. And the band that we had put together, I was the business guy in this band. Ladd was the creative guy.
Yep.
He wrote all the music, wrote all the arrangements, and we did a combination of original stuff and pop music at the time.
Yeah.
I remember singing "Sherry, Sherry, Baby."
Yeah, right. I'm sure you played that plenty of times. Yeah. Right. Well, I've got a couple photos that I'm gonna sort of surprise you with here.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see that one.
I may fall over, so.
Yeah, hang on a second. Let me get this photo going. I think you'll appreciate it. So there's one. Can you see that one?
Yeah, that's a rehearsal. That's in the Christ room.
That's what I thought. That's at Capital University there in the Christ room.
There are students. Those are I recognize the students sitting there too.
Yeah, and then this one. Get ready for this one, Ray.
Oh my God.
What is going on with that facial hair?
Now that's earlier.
Okay.
That's when when I came back to town, I was playing in rock bands, Chicago style bands.
Yeah.
So my hair was actually a little bit longer than that at one time. And I had all that facial hair.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of reminds me of a little bit of a Doc Severinsen kind of a vibe in that era.
Well, I was actually accused of that because I wore outrageous suits on stage. Most of the stuff my mother made.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she made my clothes.
Wow.
I had those shirts that blossomed out like old pirate shirts, like you see Johnny Depp.
Yeah. I
had shirts like that. I had bell bottoms, the whole bit. She made me a powder blue outfit. And the other one was red, I think.
Wow.
And then I bought some suits that were also ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah. And then here's another one. Talk just for a second about this one.
That's Bill Holman.
Yeah.
Who's was one of our guest artists early on. And Bill had cancer of the jaw, I believe, but agreed to come over, and we had a concert of his music. And he was a tenor saxophone player. Actually played with Kenton and a bunch of people. Then he turned into a writer. He wrote contemporary concepts for Kenton.
That's right. Yeah.
And Malagueña, which was a big Kenton tune, and was probably the jazz big band arranger on the West Coast forever.
Yeah.
He hadn't played tenor saxophone, and I kept needling him about it, and he actually got kind of irritated with me. but on Saturday, I brought a tenor saxophone in from the university and handed it to him. We were doing 4 concerts at that time, I think.
Okay.
Or 3. No, we were doing 3. I'm sorry. We were doing 3. So he didn't play on Friday night. But on Saturday night, I brought the tenor saxophone, and he actually put it in. He'd been doodling around. He didn't fool me any because he'd been playing a little bit.
Right.
I said, how about playing tonight? And he didn't want to play. I said, 1 chorus. And he said, I'll do 1 chorus, but that's all I'll do.
Wow. And so that was probably the first time he had played in quite a while.
I think it was the first time he had played publicly for probably 5 or 6 years.
Wow. That's great. And so I want to talk really quickly about the first major guest artist, that being one that I know that Wes Orr still to this day is his favorite, most beloved guest artist, and that was Clark Terry.
Yeah,
and that coincided with you charging, making it a ticketed event, and what would become the series that we even know today.
that's right. And that first concert was played with the combination student professional big band.
Right.
But it was the only concert ever played by that band.
Okay. All right.
That lasted 1 concert, and then I convinced Dr. Langevin that we'd be better off if we did it totally professionally, and he went along with it.
Wow. That's great. And so that Clark Terry show, talk about what that did to set the tone for the band as a group that would feature national talent, because that's really, to this day, you think Joe Williams, Harry Sweets Edison, Tito Puente, the Brecker Brothers, Diane Shure, and the list goes on up to John Clayton, Jeff Hamilton, Benny Green recently, Bria Skonberg. That is one of the big features of the Columbus Jazz Orchestra, and that was really started by that Clark Terry concert.
Started by that Clark Terry concert. That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, Ladd was back in that year, I think in January with Marvin Stamm, and we did a concert, but he conducted. I didn't really start conducting the band until probably 3 or 4 years into it.
Okay.
When one of my mentors, a guy named Gene D'Angelo, that will ring with a lot of people. He was a powerhouse person here in town for a long time. Looked at me one night and said, you ought to get out of the trumpet section and start leading this GD band. Because there's a big band should have a front man. He said, just think about that for 2 minutes. Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey.
Yeah.
And he had actually played with Benny
Okay.
Carter. He actually played in the Benny Carter Orchestra and the Clyde Thornhill Orchestra.
Yeah.
So he had actually played in those bands. He said, you ought to be out in front of the band. And so I was a little hesitant, but I did it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
I would have incurred his wrath, and I wasn't about to do that.
Well, and there's something to be said for his point that the band, or the audience will know the leader of the band and the characters in the band. And I think one of the things that you would become known for, in addition to the guest artists that we talked about and others, is you took on a personality that was unto itself, not only just for yourself, but you sort of made yourself the fall guy as a means to bring more personality to your band members. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, Wes Orr always could have a comment if you let him do it. And it was very early on when we were starting at Patel that I came out. I watched the Bowery Boys, and they murdered the English language.
Okay.
And I came out one night and said, we have a potpourri of music to play for you this evening. and Wes broke up laughing along with Bob Berkheimer and some of the other bands. And Al Berry chimed in and said, you mean potpourri, you dummy. Of course, the audience came apart,
Right.
And I think I might have done a pratfall. I was famous for pratfalls.
Yeah. Yeah.
Falling on the floor.
Yep.
So,
well, and one of the comments that we've had over time is that banter and that relationship between you and the band, coupled, this is only possible, and I'm sure you would agree, with a band that can play its tail off, that a band that can play second to none. You know, when the band plays at that high level, you're playing repertoire that needs to be preserved and carried forward, but you do it with humor. You know, I think that brought the audience in on the experience. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. We even Wes always talks about how we didn't turn the lights all the way down.
Yeah.
Because the guys in the band wanted to see the audience.
Right.
They thought they thought that was important, and I went along with it.
Yeah.
It wasn't really my idea. It just kind of happened.
Yeah. When you think about the guest artists that you brought in, who are some guest artists that when you think of Ray Eubanks, the jazz fan, you know, just the fan of jazz, were there ever any moments where you stood on the stage looking at the person that was standing in front of your band and went, pinched yourself, like, how did this happen? I've always been a fan of this person or that person. What was a show that really kind of gave you butterflies in that way?
Oh, there were a lot of them, Zach.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, CT played with us at least 8 times. We played with him not only here on our series, but we played with him in New Orleans. We played with him in other places as well.
Yeah.
And so CT was, I mean, I was always pinching myself. I mean, he had a nickname for me, which I can't repeat on the air. But,
okay.
and then you know, like Doc Severinsen,
right,
was an early guest, and that's because he was a friend of Jerry Kay, who was this big contractor.
Yep.
And Jerry had him in when he was still a high school band director. When Jerry was still a high school band director, he was a soloist at Eastmore High School. So he said, well, why don't we get Doc to come in? That's when we were just playing one night.
Mm-hmm.
We had Doc. You know, you're pinching yourself there. I mean, Doc Severinsen's on your stage. But, you know, I mean, Benny Carter was a hero of mine.
Yeah.
I had listened to recordings of his band. You know, there were people like, well, I mean, we had the Ahmad Jamal Trio and the Ramsey Lewis Trio as trios.
Right. And so why don't you talk about that, Ray? Because one thing that you say in the DVD, and I've known this because I was the librarian for the band, I know pretty closely about the incredible library of music that the band has amassed over the years, over 2,000 pieces, well over 2,000 pieces. One of the things that you mentioned is that because you featured guest artists who often, they weren't regularly performing with big bands. They were largely small group or solo artists that traveled the country. That called on you to pull in some arrangements from local arrangers who we were blessed to have the talents of, to really make and curate an entire show around these artists. Talk just a little bit about that.
Well, at the time, Von Weister was in the band.
Yep.
And he kind of stepped up and did some writing. I had a couple of students out at school. When the Brecker brothers were in, they had a record that was in the top 20. I can't remember what the name of it was now. A student by the name of Glenn Griffith wrote like four charts built around their stuff, so they'd have something to play with the band. But it was just the two of them. They didn't bring their band with them.
Right.
So we had to create something there. We did, and then, like I said, Vaughn was the main arranger for a long time, and then Jeanette. I think Hank Maher's first arrangements were for Jeanette Williams. Okay. Because he knew her real well and knew how she sang. Yep. And he'd had some words when I said that Jeanette was coming in. He said something to the effect that, well, if you're going to write for her, you're going to need to write around her, because she sings the way she sings. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yep. And you know what? I'm sure that that's the case for many artists that you've brought in, where the arranger really has to write to bring out the strengths in that solo artist. It's really about that.
Well, that was true of Monty Alexander.
Yep.
And both trios. I mean, they brought their full trios in, and Hank, Gary Carney, and Vaughn wrote a whole show for Monty Alexander.
Yeah.
Because at the time he was doing Nat King Cole, but he just had a trio too.
Yeah.
He came in with the bass player Len Seaton, but he
Mhm.
didn't bring a drummer.
Right. Right.
Bob played drums.
And so how do you think, Ray, that the, you know, just in the time that as soon as I got to college, of course, I went to Capitol where Vaughn taught for so many years, but there was this buzz about Vaughn's charts and the notoriety outside of just Columbus. Of course, there are some Vaughn charts on some Woody Herman recordings because Vaughn was on that band, but even beyond that, how do you think that the artists that came in responded to the writing of Gary Carney, Hank, and Vaughn?
Well, I know for a fact that Amal Jamal and Ramsey Lewis were absolutely, in fact, I gave Amal Jamal everything that we wrote for him because he started to realize, oh, there's all these damn college jazz bands out there.
That's right.
And so he started working the university circuit, and I think he did pretty well with it.
Yeah.
Ramsey Lewis was really a pretty big star. You know, he did Hang On Sloopy.
Yeah.
And although he refused to play it in Columbus, Ohio.
Tease.
And Gary Carney had written him a great arrangement. He said, I don't play that anymore.
We're going to have to dig that out and play it on a Southern theater show. I'll have to get in Byron's ear about that.
Yeah. Gary wrote a great arrangement for the Ramsey Lewis trio to play it.
Yeah.
And we didn't play it.
Oh man.
I mean, he really did. He was very adamant about it. No, that's 20 years ago. I don't do that song anymore. I don't like it.
Yeah. Right. Well, so one of the things I want to talk about is the move to Patel Hall, because that really seems, as I understand the history, to be sort of the first real home for the band, where it's like,
yes.
that is where we belong. And one of the things you mentioned in the DVD that I didn't realize, of course, as we all know, that the CJO and the JAG, as it were, and now the CJO is built on a subscription model, you know, and we're selling subscriptions. You want somebody to come back for every show, and that commitment, you know, lets us know what we've got in our ticket buying audience. You were selling subscriptions at that time already, and of the 3,000 seat capacity, 2,500 of them at one time were spoken for by subscribers, yes, leaving only 500 tickets to sell for single tickets.
That's right, for the whole week.
That's an incredible. I mean, I don't think people realize how popular the band was. That 2,500 people bought subscriptions for the entire season of the band. Yeah,
we went from one night and we subscribed out. So then we went to 2 nights, and I think probably the first season we had Sunday night was sold out, and Saturday night we had about half a house sold, but we were almost always sold out for 2 nights.
Sure.
Then along came Stan Kenton.
Talk about that show and what it did to the organization.
Oh man. I mean, people were actually angry that they couldn't get seats. And so I have to say that by that time, a lot of work had dried up. So we'd started out as a Sunday night band because guys had gigs on Friday and Saturday night.
Right.
And by the time the first Kenton show came along, we had gone to 2 nights, and guys, by then we were paying pretty well, so guys didn't care about missing a Saturday night gig so much.
Sure.
But there were so many people that I said, well, next year we'll just try 3 concerts.
Yeah.
And because Stan Kenton's name was on there, people bought. I mean, there was a bus of 40 people that came all the way from Chicago. People came from Pittsburgh. People came from Cincinnati. People came from Dayton. People came from all over the place for that show.
Yeah.
And a lot of them stayed on as subscribers. I mean, we had a trail of people came up from Cincinnati to hear the band, and were subscribers, you know. And so we went from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and eventually 6 shows.
Yeah. One of the things I was struck by that may play a role in this is just how many times the Kenton alum drummer and from Cincinnati and Indiana that we all love, John Von Olen, was a guest artist with the band. I imagine that was a big role.
He played 15 Kenton concerts.
Yeah, exactly.
Every once in a while, Jerry McKenzie would come down from Detroit.
Yep. There's a poster on our wall in the office signed by Jerry McKenzie on one of the Kenton shows.
Not many people know that he was a narc. When he left the band, he got out. He played drums on the weekend in Detroit, but he was a narc.
Huh.
He was an undercover cop in Detroit.
Wow. Well, speaking of John Von Olen, I know last week Byron Stripling spoke with Jeff Hamilton, and that, of course, was Jeff's mentor and hugely influential to Jeff. To have a guy like John Von Olen right in our backyard to be able to come up and play, so many people, even today, you did a Kenton show with Von's band not long ago, a couple years back,
5 years.
Shortly before Von Olen passed away. And people came from all over to hear him. So to have that kind of following for Midwest musicians was really something.
Yeah. It's kind of an amazing story because, Wes and Sonny and Al and some of the guys in the band that were more social, would be out in restaurants, would be in a restaurant someplace. People would come up to them.
Yeah.
And say, "Aren't you?" and that always surprised them,
Right. Well, Ray, I want to talk about the impact that the band ended up making on local musicians. But first, I want to set that up by playing just a short clip from the DVD that has, you've already mentioned her, the great Jeanette Williams singing the end of Satin Doll. Yeah. Just to hear the sound of the band with a big voice like Jeanette's. Let's take a quick listen here.
Exciting.
My satin doll, oh, Captain, my satin doll, speaks Latin, my satin
Yeah.
That one of a kind voice, and I know that during that time you had Tia Harris on, Mary McClendon, Kelly Crum, now Kelly Crum Delaveris, yeah. And of course the horn soloists, the Gene Walker, Rusty Bryant.
Rusty Bryant played a lot, yeah.
Yeah, talk about those.
I tried to get Rusty on for a couple tunes every year.
Yeah. First, talk about the vocalist that you were able to have with the band. And I know with Tia, I believe she went to Spain with you all.
She went to Europe with us twice.
Yeah.
It was a huge hit because she sang basically the Diane Shore repertoire.
Okay.
And a couple things that Stan had written for her,
mm-hmm.
And some Natalie Cole things. And she was a huge hit in Spain. And she played with my commercial band,
yeah,
which I was running at the same time. She was my regular singer for a lot of years. Stan Smith actually discovered her, even though I like to claim that I did. But Stan told me about her, and Stan actually led my commercial band, which was an octet. He actually I announced and Stan would be kicking off the tune. So he was actually the musical director and contributed a lot of arrangements for that band, along with a guy named Dave Wheeler.
Right. And I know that at least one of the Europe trips, you also took the great saxophonist Gene Walker. And you've told me just how big of a star Gene could be when he got a chance to stand up with the band and blow. Talk just a little bit about having Gene Walker in that band.
Well, Gene Walker went to Spain with us both times.
Yeah.
And I said to him once, well, he was upset with himself on the first trip because he didn't get the music early enough. But he was holding his own. And I said, Gene, I don't care if you just sit there with a horn in your mouth. I don't care if you play a note. All you have to do is play these 3 solos.
Stand up and play.
Stand up and play, man.
Yeah.
And he always, he always brought down the house.
Yeah.
It was kind of like I always compared it to Ellington's relationship to Paul Gonsalves.
Right.
Because Gonsalves sometimes wouldn't show up to the last set the band played because he was a raving alcoholic.
Yeah.
And finally he would come in on the bus and Ellington didn't care.
Right.
He said, just, we're going to do diminuendo and crescendo and blue, and we're going to do body and soul. And that's all Ellington cared about, was that he stood up and played those 2 tunes because that was the end of the night.
Right. Well, Gene Walker, I was so fortunate that I got to play with Gene a little bit and spend some time with him before he passed. What a sound. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
when I hear folks like Brian Olszewski now, I can hear Gene in their sound. But Gene was somebody that just had such a big, warm sound.
Yes, he did.
And another person I want your—
It was an old sound.
Yes. It reminds me of a Gene Emmons type sound, Another person that was so important in that band was the late, great Hank Maher.
Yeah.
And of course, this month we are going to award our Hank Maher High School Jazz Award winner. We did get several submissions, even though we were in a pandemic, and we're excited to review those. People need to remember that not only was Hank a great pianist, an amazing B3 organist, credible arranger, he was a music director, one of the first African-American music directors in Las Vegas. How important was— He was the first. Yeah, I couldn't remember if it was first or second, right. How important was it to have Hank Maher sitting at the piano for all those years?
The wizard of the keyboard.
Yeah.
That's what we called him, the wizard of the keyboard. Well, the way we prepared for concerts was, I had a big stack of music, and first rehearsal we'd be reading through them. Well, sometimes Wes would be the guy that would say, "Pass it in." That would be the end of that, pass it in. We're not going to play that. Sometimes something would go through, and I would be doubting, I don't know, and I just look at Hank.
Yeah.
And Hank would just very steadily tell me, he'd get a look on his face that would say, probably we ought to pass it in.
Right.
So then I would say, pass it in.
Yeah.
Sometimes I got groans from the band because sometimes the band wanted to play it, but if Hank didn't want to play it, I didn't play it.
Right. Yeah.
So he was musically, he also played my jazz trio.
Mm-hmm.
I had a trio with Billy Brown, Hank Maher, Gene Walker. Those are the 3 guys. It was actually a quartet. Myself.
Yeah. Right.
And either Jeanette or Mary were the singers.
Yeah.
And we played jazz. We played small group jazz things. Played at the governor's mansion on numerous occasions.
Mm-hmm.
Governor Celeste. He loved Hank Maher.
Right. Well, and there's such a legacy of the B3 organ,
Yeah.
I mean, Kevin Turner, the great guitarist, has told me that at one point in this town, in terms of the weekend hotel gigs, almost all the hotel gigs were spoken for by organ players. And you had to break into their bands, really, in order to have regular hotel gigs.
Well, actually, the pianist before Hank was Bobby Pierce.
Yeah.
And he was a B3 player, and a sensational one.
Yep.
He left and went to the West Coast, where he's still playing. He's still an active player, marvelous piano player, and also a marvelous B3 player. Don Patterson's from Columbus. Currently, Tony Monaco,
Yep.
who has a international reputation. So, yeah, Philadelphia likes to take a lot of credit for being the B3 capital of the world, but I've heard those guys.
Enough said.
I've heard
Ray,
those guys.
I want to look at a couple photos with you, Ray, that talk a little bit about your focus on education with the arts group. You did some school shows here with the small group. I think you can see sort of faintly back there. There's Gene Walker, I think Michael Cox, Jim Masters, Stan Smith, maybe Doug Richardson, and others. Here's another photo of that same school
Yeah,
concert.
that's a small band. We played Music Performance Trust Funds was still active and alive and well, and Tommy Dale was the president of the union, and Tommy Dale was a lead trombone player in the band, and so we got our fair share of Music Performance Trust Funds.
Yeah.
We got an equal share along with the symphony.
Wow.
I mean, our share of the Music Performance Trust Funds equaled what the symphony got.
Right.
And that was largely because of Tommy, because he
Yeah.
thought it was that important.
Yeah.
That is that band. Gene Walker always, when we would come in and set up, and the kids would come in, of course, there was total chaos. It was,
Right.
I mean, kids in a what do you call those things?
Yeah, cafetorium or whatever.
Cafetorium, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, in the cafetorium. And Gene would always start the show in the back of the auditorium. He'd just start playing the blues.
Yeah.
And he would start walking down the middle of the aisle, and the audience would get quiet.
Yeah.
And then we'd launch into the first tune, which was the blues. And then the program would proceed from there.
Yeah.
But Gene was always the guy that he was the quieter.
Yeah.
Never a word was said. The principal would want to say, "Now I'll come up and get the kids quiet." And I'd say, "No. You don't need to do that. They'll quiet down."
Yep.
And they always did.
Yeah. Speaking of education, Dr. Lou Fisher and his wife Marianne are watching. Dr. Lou says, "Ray, it's because of you that people like me do what we do. Love you."
Dr. Lou and I have been. Dr. Lou has treated me with so much respect that sometimes I have to pinch myself.
Yeah. And of course, that was something that you were a part of. You were at Capital University as the jazz program there was evolving. I believe Dr. Lou came in around 1994. Talk about what he brought to that program.
Yeah. I mean, of course, he's one of the great bass players.
Absolutely.
And that's what a lot of people don't realize about him. And he still plays with Houghton.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember Houghton's first name.
Steve
Houghton,
Yeah.
who's been over at Indiana for years. But I first met Steve with Rosemary Clooney.
Yeah.
He was playing drums with Rosemary Clooney when she came in and performed at the Palace. And, what can I say, I mean,
And of course, Lou would go on to be one of the founding members of the Jazz Education Network, was a major part of IJE prior to that. But some of the early founding meetings of the Jazz Education Network happened on the campus of Capital University with.
I think, I've believed that if it hadn't been for Lou Fisher, it would have never happened.
Yeah.
Because the other organization, which we won't talk about, had gotten a little corrupt.
Yeah. Well, he and Mary Jo Papich both had a vision, and to see that happening and continuing on, I was a beneficiary of his teaching at Capital as well. Ray, I want to talk just a little bit more about education with you, because you started doing school shows at the Southern Theater for Columbus Public Schools, now Columbus City Schools. You and Becky Ogden, Grandma Becky, wrote a show, and I've got a couple photos with you shaking hands with some audience members at the Southern.
I just lost you. I think my computer's running down.
That's okay. I'm talking about the shows at the All That Jazz shows at the Southern, and how, can you hear me, Ray?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. And how you and Grandma Becky Ogden, wrote shows for the entire fourth grade, all the fourth graders in Columbus City to come and see the Columbus Jazz Orchestra. Talk a little bit about that opportunity.
Well, it was largely the work of Judy Schaefer, who was and Becky. Becky had all the materials, and the general manager at the time, because I was moving out, the general manager at the time had produced this fancy brochure, and Becky said, no, kids will blow their nose and throw them in the waste paper basket. You don't want to spend any money on that.
Right.
Just put it on the copy machine and put it on blue paper or something, which is what we did.
Yep.
And teachers loved it as teaching material because kids will be kids. Are you there?
Yep.
And she actually did the shows. I mean,
right.
I conducted the band, but Becky came out on stage and taught.
Yeah.
So she was no Becky, no show.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, no Becky, no early childhood education for jazz anywhere. You know,
that's
here in Columbus.
that's very true.
Right, right. Of course, she was one of the first recipients of what would become the Ray Eubanks Award. A few years ago, we decided that your service to Columbus, we needed to use that legacy to honor folks that like you, forged a path through music. And of course, Becky was one of the winners of that award. Ray, I want to talk about one more topic here as we wind things down, and that is your retirement from Jazz Arts Group. You may not know this, but you know, we were going through some files, and I found some old succession planning files that looking at the handwriting, I knew exactly whose it was. You were thinking about how to take the Jazz Arts Group and move it forward after you were done. Not to say that you were going to be, you know, gone, but just you saw that the organization needed to live on. And I have to share this because it's really funny before we get into this. Here's an invitation from your retirement party. It says he's irate, he's moody, he's quirky, he's passionate, he's driven, he's almost totally nuts. He's talented, he's a pain, he's a maverick, he's a visionary, he really knows his stuff. He's a character, he's larger than life, he's a benevolent dictator, he's Ray. And he'll still be around next year. He's retiring, we're gonna miss him. Come celebrate Ray's 30 years at the helm. I thought that was funny. I just stumbled on that today when I was looking through some files.
My daughter's current boss wrote that.
That's incredible.
Beverly Bethke.
Yeah. And so really, you were thinking about Jazz Arts Group and the Columbus Jazz Orchestra moving forward for years to come. Talk about, of course, Byron Stripling had come and played at Patel.
Yes.
And you had a vision for what the band needed. And I know there was a whole search, and we don't need to bore everyone with that, but talk about just what you had in mind for the organization to live on. It's been, you said in the DVD, you wanted to see it run for another 20 to 25 years. And we're just about approaching 20 years since your retirement, and it happened. Uh-oh, we lost him. I'm thinking that we lost his computer battery. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in a way that only Ray Eubanks can do, I believe that wraps it up for this. We would love to have him back to continue this conversation, but that's probably going to do it for this episode of Offstage Live. We appreciate you coming for this episode. We were just about to the end of our hour. I want to thank Ray for being on with us. And I want to let you know that Byron Stripling will be on this Sunday with the incredible jazz historian, saxophone player, band leader, Lauren Schoenberg, who has been so responsible for keeping the history of jazz moving forward. His work at the Smithsonian and others is really incredible. Please follow us on Facebook in order to do so, in order to see our next video. Share this video. Go onto YouTube and continue to seek out all of the Offstage Live episodes. 1 week from now, after Byron's episode with Lauren Schoenberg, we come back with myself and 4 individuals that shared the stage with the great Hank Maher. We hope you will join us for that. Thank you so much. We hope you're staying safe out there. Continue to support the arts, and we will see you very soon. Thank you.